Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be going over the final chapter from the book Influence by Dr. Robert Cialdini, talking about the psychology of persuasion. And last time we went over the final lever of influence in Dr. Cialdini's 7 levers of influence, talking about the unity principle. And we talked about the difference between unity and liking, in that on the surface level, it seems like they are very similar. The liking principle, of course, stated that we most likely will comply with people who are like ourselves. So they talk like us, or they dress like us, or they have similar interests as us. But the unity principle builds on top, and it actually takes it one step further in saying that we're most likely to comply with people who are of us. So this could be like genetic similarities. This could be just being from the same location, being from the same origin, being, what was the other one I was going to say? Suffering through things together, creating things together. So it's not just the fact that you're like someone, but you're of someone. And that of can take place in many different fashions. Like I said, genetic, you could be from the same place. You can go through a hardship together, etc., etc. Well, today, this chapter is going to be very short. The chapter is titled Instant Influence, and it's actually a bonus chapter for the newest addition to this book, Influence, the 2021 version. And this is just a very short chapter, kind of summarizing stuff that we've already kind of gone over. And I'll just go to the first slide. So this was a funny story that Robert starts off talking about. There was this show, I guess, back in the 1960s. A guy by the name of Joe Pine. He has, it's basically kind of sounds like a 1960s version of Oprah. Like, you know, you bring on guests and you interview them, etc. Kind of what I'm trying to do with the Chee-Tash podcast over on Spotify and Apple, Google, Amazon. Anyway, Pine one time had on a guy by the name of Frank Zappa, I guess a famous musician. I'm not super familiar with Frank Zappa. And he had him on, this is the 1960s. Frank's got very, very long hair. And for guys at the time, that's very unusual and controversial. And Joe seemingly seems like a kind of more conservative type of dude. As soon as Zappa had been introduced and seated, the following exchange occurs. So Joe Pine says to Zappa, "I guess your long hair makes you look like a girl." And then Frank Zappa tells Joe, "I guess your wooden leg makes you a table." Because Joe Pine actually had his leg amputated. Yeah, leg amputation that had embittered him to life. Others said, no, okay, so he was a very surly personality. Some people say it was because of his wooden leg. Frank Zappa makes this joke, "I guess your wooden leg makes you a table." So all that being said, that's kind of what Robert is getting at here, is like a click run response. So you see long hair, makes you think girl. But now on the Frank side, and it's kind of funny, you see wood and you think table or like chair. And this isn't anything new. We've talked about this primitive click in the introduction in chapter 1 when we were talking about turkeys and hearing the sound of their chicks and the cheep cheep from their chicks, even if it was coming from a cat. Remember, we talked about this study? They had these mechanical or artificial cheep cheep sounds coming from a cat, like a statue of a cat, which is like a known enemy of the turkey. It's going to attack it. It's going to try to eat it. And yet the turkey still cares for and is not scared of the cat because of the cheep cheep sounds. It's just a click run response. It hears cheep cheep. It thinks, oh, these are my baby chicks. I got to take care of them. So when we make decisions, we sometimes don't use all the relevant information that's at our disposal. We use a fast type of thinking. In the previous chapter, or one of the previous chapters, and actually multiple times in this book, Robert alludes to the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Danny Kahneman. Or rather, he refers to Danny Kahneman. Danny Kahneman just so happened to write a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which I read years and years ago. It's a very good book. But he essentially says that we have these two systems of thinking. One's very fast and one's very slow and deliberate, logical. And then the first one that I had mentioned, very fast, emotional, instinctual. So a lot of the times we're using that fast type of thinking where we have limited resources, we have limited access to all the relevant information, and we just go with what's the best option in the most efficient, fastest way possible. And for animals, this is fine, Robert says. For animals who have a limited brain capacity, they don't have the awareness of themselves and their surroundings and being able to think deeply about certain things. Things are trying to eat them. They're trying to survive. They don't have the same luxuries that we do. For animals, this is totally fine to just have a click-run response. Because normally that information that they have, the limited information that they have, is enough. To hear a cheep, cheep sound, most of the time, that's enough for a turkey to realize, okay, those are my baby chicks. I got to take care of them. It's just when we manipulate it in that experiment where it comes like a toy cat or what have you, then it makes it seem weird that, like, why would the turkey do that? Well, because 99% of the time, it's never going to counter a scenario like that. So for animals, it's cool. For us, doesn't really work out so well a lot of times because we have this greater capacity to think. We have this greater capacity to realize and really walk through all of our options when it comes to decision making. But we still get caught up in the same trappings because we start to get, FOMO. We get super stressed out. We have times in the day where we have decreased energy and we feel rushed and we just got to make a decision, and we do a click run response, and all of a sudden you are agreeing to something that you probably don't want to agree with, or you are doing something that's probably not the best idea, but because you did your click run response, you went with it. And that's kind of the name of the game in today's world. In today's world, it's probably even harder. And I mean, at the time of this book's writing, the original publishing, I think, was like early 1980s. It was still bad then, but I can't imagine it's any worse now, or it's any better now. It's probably worse, especially due to technology. And Dr. Cialdini talks about how knowledge in certain areas of science, so the amount of information out there just keeps increasing and increasing, but he says that doesn't necessarily translate to knowledge because it's known as the information age or the digital age, but that doesn't necessarily mean age. And this is something that I've come to realize as of recently. Information does not translate. Where I love listening to podcasts and watching YouTube videos on, they're semi-educational, and there's news podcasts out there that I like listening to. But does it translate into knowledge for me? I don't know. Am I just listening just to listen and just to consume information? Maybe sometimes, yeah. But with this doubling of science, or knowledge in certain areas of science doubling every 8 years, you start to struggle with keeping yourself current and up to date on all the latest stuff. Especially because from large organizations anymore, it's being disseminated from, the internet, from podcasts and YouTube channels. Whereas before, you really had to kind of buy the research papers or be a part of those groups to really kind of know what was going on. But now you can look up scientific journals. Yeah, some of them you still have to pay for, but at least you have the access to them at your fingertips in your house. It's nothing that necessarily has to be emailed to you or mailed to you, or you have to go to the library and get it. You can get it from the comfort of your home. So that's a good thing, but then you're also still struggling with just keeping up, or not all the time, but very, very more frequently now than it used to be. And it's the same thing with tech. I mean, tech has been evolving very, very fast. And instead of looking at a totality of evidence or sources of information, we tend to just focus on a single reliable source of information. And you can see how oftentimes this leads us astray, because people will know that that's other people's single reliable source of information. They can take advantage of people by using the principles in the book, the 7 levers of influence, let's see if I can name them, the reciprocation, the social proof, the authority, the liking, the unity, the commitment and consistency, and the scarcity. Yeah, I think I did. That's 7 right there. Commitment and consistency was one thing. So you have to kind of watch out for the people who are trying to take advantage of you. And that's one thing I liked that Robert always did in each chapter for each lever of influence, was he gave a defense to it. And really kind of the defenses to the levers of influence were all pretty similar, in that you just have to recognize it and just not play ball. You recognize that somebody's trying to get you into a compliance request under devious circumstances, and you recognize and you call it out for what it is. But now you have to be careful with legitimate attempts at influence, and not, faking data, or not faking, social proof, not faking scarcity. Because if it is legitimately a scarce resource, if it's legitimately something that a lot of people are buying, then the salesperson, let's say, is trying to be very honest with you. And you shouldn't call out the bad behavior when there's not bad or devious behavior. But just think like, hey, do I actually need this product? Hey, do I really, really need to go? Am I just getting a fear of missing out, or do I actually need what they're selling me, basically? And we've talked about, you got to watch out for the fake reviews. You got to watch out for false advertisements, because people are out there that are using the 7 levers of influence against you, and they're attempting to make a profit off you deviously and not by honest means, and they're relying on you to take the click run response and just go along with their compliance request. So, to summarize, animals, it's okay for them to use the click run response, because more often than not, it's the right response to do. But for us, sometimes we get forced into a click run response via the 7 levers of influence, and it causes us sometimes to go along with requests that we don't need to go along with, and are being done to us for various nefarious reasons, like to get our money and such. And like I said, the 7 levers of influence can be used to do that we discussed in the book. And there are ways to increase a person's chances of a click run response. If you fully overload somebody with too much information, if you catch somebody while they have a decreased energy, or they are super, super tired, or they're distracted, they're going to rely on those click run responses more so than if they actually had the time to stop and think. All in all, This was a great book. And I am starting to recognize the seven levers of influence just out in the world and out in my life. And I am now more cognizant and trying to watch out for fabrications and people trying to use the levers of influence against me. And I feel like I'm better off having read this book and recognizing that. I had interviewed an author, Tom Carr, for the Chee-Tash podcast. And we had kind of talked about how when he goes to book fairs, and he wrote a book on famous Michigan murders. He wrote another book on famous crimes, bank heists, robberies, etc. in Michigan. And he was talking about how at book fairs he'll only put a certain number of books on the table versus just stacking up like tons and tons of his books when he goes to a book fair. And I was telling him, like, oh, you're using the scarcity principle there. Because if you stack up, if you have a ton of books on your book fair table, it's going to make it seem like nobody's buying your book. But if you have less and less, the supply is going to seem decreased, and maybe you might drive more customers to buy it because it makes it seem like you have a short supply. So it's kind of maybe manipulating it in a way. And it's going to depend on if maybe he's telling people like, oh, I don't have that many books, you should buy it right now. And then he's got like truckloads of it, outside. I don't think he's doing that, by the way. But yeah, it's both kind of like a scarcity and kind of maybe like a social proof, making it seem like, hey, a lot of people are buying it, so hey, maybe I should buy it. So yeah, these levers of influence are out there if you look hard enough, if you pay attention. And again, highly, highly recommend the book, Influence by Robert Cialdini. If you're going to buy it, I would say buy the newest version you can, just so you can get the new chapter on unity. And you get some updated examples and case studies throughout the book that are more tailored to like present time. And guys, that's going to do it. That marks the end of the book Influence. Thank you so much for walking through this book with me on this journey. Hopefully you have learned some stuff from the book. Hopefully you've taken away a lot of good tidbits that you can use in your life. I'll make a book announcement for the next book that we do, but I think I already have it picked out. I'll keep that a secret until you guys see it up on the channel. But guys, thank you very much for listening. My name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care.